their faith's pretty deep, and but they've come from country backgrounds.
It's good, down to earth.
Yes, pretty down to earth. Gee, they saw some bloody good reds though. A place called The Carriages, and I thought, where the hell's that? I said, oh, it's between here and Kerrang or somewhere, and, I thought I'd just put mine away. This is too good.
That's a bit like that famous Peanuts cartoon where they're lying on the baseball mound and asking, what can you see in the cloud formation? Linus, who's, the philosopher, says, I can see the stoning of Stephen, and Paul's over there minding the garments. And Linus says, I can see part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Isaiah chapter 66. And one of the other one he says, what about you, Charlie Brown? He said, I was going to say a ducky and a horse, but I think I'll forget it.
I don't think it's been raining, but
it's is that blood?
I don't think it's
just a little bit. It's just a little bit red there. So irritating.
But anyway, good work.
Yeah, good on you.
It's a paper on cosmology that I'd be interested for you to have a look at. But I've asked Father Des, could he put the sources of the timeline he's got somewhere? Because I think as he's presented it, people ask, well, is this controlled by one person or a constellation of signs? But it's very interesting timeline. They seem to be crucified.
Oh gosh.
Can I ask you a favor? Could you please announce people, if not necessary, avoid to walk through there?
Excuse me. Some of you are familiar with the practice that if whoever is presenting here would like you to be quiet, so he or she can say something, or put the hand up. So don't put your hand up unless you shut up as well, so they can hear. Two things. Could you please avoid walking through here, past that pole, because the camera's set up there, it might knock it. Pam, would you like to explain a bit about the setting? You did say symbols speak for themselves, but I think what you explained to me was nice.
I think our setting tells a story. At the last institute, which I think was a couple of years ago, we were given little boats to take away to start our journey. And so we've been sailing our little boats and doing the things that we need to do and seeing the things we see. And now we've been invited to moor at Holy Cross for a while, to bring our ship to harbour, to a safe harbour. To a safe harbour. So, whatever that means for you, however you remember the last institute, and whatever's happened to you in the past 2 years in your ministry, in your life, in your family, in your personal development, in your personal life, that's all there. And of course it's a profession cross. With the piece of fabric, with all those hands on it, your hand is there. All the people that you've worked with or that you've touched, their hand is there. The good old friendship ring that we've used in so many liturgies and paraliturgies, all in this together. Instead of water coming from our Passion Cross, we've got the light of the Holy Spirit, which is Holy Spirit province. And this is what we're on about at this institute, asking the Spirit to enliven us, to recreate and re-enliven our charism. And it's asking us how we're going to break bread, how we're going to make Eucharist now, today, in today's world, in our different circumstances. What sort of ministries are we going to be involved in, of service and companionship? And how is that going to be distilled so that when we come to make that fourth vow of keeping alive the memory of the Passion, as Paul of the Cross did in front of the icon, what will our promise encompass today after this institute?
Right. Thank you. It's all right just to be here, isn't it? Just to be waiting. Okay, this little prayer we pray before our communal prayers, so can we just pray this together, please? At the name of Jesus, every knee should bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Amen. So for this institute, we use this well-known scriptural quote: "No one pours new wine into old wineskins, because the fermentation process will burst the old skins, ruining both. Instead, new wine must be poured into new wineskins." So in this opening session, taking that theme, we're focusing on the challenge of living and sharing the Passionist charism in a change of era. Some of the people here would be familiar with this Latin saying, "Nemo dat quod non habet." Heard of it? It's a legal principle to do with ownership and the selling of goods. It means you can't give what you don't have. It seems to me that it's worth us reflecting on that phrase. You can't give what you haven't got, with regard to our life and ministry as Passionists, because Pope Francis advised us that we're not living in an era of change. We're living in a change of era. So we can't just acknowledge that and then ignore it in the way we live and minister. This little quote to do with Karl Rahner, a famous Jesuit theologian. God addressed the church the question, does the church have the courage to undertake an apostolic offensive into the future, and the necessary courage to show to the world that no one could have the impression that the church only exists because it has survived and not yet had time to die. Not very positive. So I think we would want that same challenge to apply to us, just to cease to be relevant. To be irrelevant would be of no sense to us. So a challenge to us and to our province, and there's a sense of urgency in renewing and adapting the focus, the content and the language of Passionist proclamation and ministry, given that it's a change of era. So what's the core of the Passionist message? In proclaiming the message of the cross, we must, in the spirit of our founder, give primary emphasis to Jesus' faithfulness to doing the will of the Father. Throughout Paul of the Cross's letters, there are countless, hundreds of times he's writing to people where he calls them to hand over, to surrender to God's will, with the same spirit as Jesus showed in his passion. He always, not always, but nearly always links those two things. Hand your life over, trust in God, put your life in God's hands, as Jesus did in his passion. It was abandonment to the will of God that drove his whole life, and it's what enabled him to embrace suffering and death. So Jesus didn't just suddenly decide, now I'll hand my life over to God and I'll go to Calvary. It's the way he'd lived. So this was just another logical response to what he understood was his responsibility to trust in God's will, whatever unfolded. The meaning of Jesus' death is that the deepest love possible is filled with a compassion that embraces each and every person, and it's always ready to offer itself in sacrifice and as gift. It highlights God's sharing in the world's suffering, but also in the promise of new life. There's no point in having a passion without a resurrection. There's no point in having faith without hope. Jesus' death also speaks, as did his life, about a different meaning of power to what operates. We have that famous scene with he and Pilate. Who's the man with the power? Who shows real power? So Jesus has the power to love, the power to let go, rather than to control. Just as Jesus made himself friend of the weak and the outcast, The Creator allows creation to find its own painful way forward. It's entrusted to unfold. How painful it must be to not just witness the suffering, for God to be the suffering. One of the things amongst these challenges is we have to rethink suffering, death and redemption. And probably we wouldn't use that last word as often in the future as we did in the past. Jesus' life symbolised divine self-sacrifice by being born in a backwater town. Some people doubt that Nazareth even existed, it's so small, in an insignificant country, and ending his life on a cross, devoid of all influence. The opposite, you would think, of what should be success. This seems to be the whole essence of God. And sadly, much of the Christian story has been anything but a reflection of this humility. It's been often about conquest and power, triumphant. And the little ones that Jesus spoke about have often felt crushed or insignificant, especially women with virtually no voice. As a result, many people have needlessly felt unworthy of God's love. The very thing that Jesus came to convince people was available has often been the reverse. God couldn't love me. People often say that what attracts them to Passionists, to our spirituality, is that we are down to earth or ordinary. I remember doing the Passionist Institute in 1981 in Rome, and a few of us, the Irish, English, we were wondering about the American Passionists. They are nice guys, but they didn't seem to be quite on the same page in their attitude. So we asked a few of them, what do people say in the States about Passionists? The first thing they all said was down to earth. Well, they show it perhaps in a different way to us, but it's exactly the same experience that the people can see in them, which of course is a direct result of our charism, which calls us to communicate a God who has entered ordinary life and shares in the suffering that we each experience. This experience of God comes to us most powerfully when we are faced with suffering and loss. It's good news for those who suffer trauma, depression, anxiety and fear. And we want to, throughout this institute, recognise these people in particular are a big concern today. So we're talking about a new era. Trauma is incredible, the amount of trauma, depression, mental illness, as we know. Much of our Catholic ritual and prayer is still expressed in atonement or redemptive language. And that developed from the practice of making sacrifices to appease God. So God has done this, we haven't lived up, so we have to win God's favour by doing something, offering sacrifices in particular. That's becoming less relevant to people's experience. For many people, they just can't relate to that, to a God who would demand that. So we need new forms of expression in the light of a different understanding we have of life, death and rebirth in a changed era. In his book, God After Darwin, theologian John Hort claims that evolutionary science has proven that the assumption of original cosmic perfection, spoiled by original sin, is untenable. That we had this perfect world and then Adam and Eve ate an apple and that changed everything. He says evolution has abolished the cosmological framework in which the ideas of reparation and atonement were expressed in spirituality. Instead, he would say the universe is not yet perfect and paradise is located in the future, not the past. It never existed as the perfect world. To the extent that we can recognise that, it changes quite a lot the emphasis we would give in how we see God inviting us to respond. So for Hort, Jesus points forward to a future of promise and hope that we haven't had before. So science informs us that in the physical world, matter is never lost. It simply changes form. And death is a stage of transformation. So this was and is the message of resurrection, transformation. And there was a time, of course, when people were very accusing of science, and it's got nothing to say to us, but there's an incredible melding today as we learn. Many of the same words and phrases and experiences are in both worlds, the religious world and the scientific world. So the hallmark of Christian belief is that Jesus is resurrected and has opened a way for all Christians to share in this new life he lives. So it's a blessing after failure, a good phrase, I think, that captures our charism. In the death of Jesus, seen through the eyes of evolution, does not save people from sin. People are still sinning. We're human and we fail. We can put it another way, that Jesus' death is the ultimate promise of God's love and therefore our true hope. That's critical when we start to consider mental illness, that it's keenly felt because this suffering struggles to find hope when people are deep in depression. Where do I go to find meaning and hope? People need a sense of purpose much more than they need being told to recover a sense of sin. It was not until the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem that blood sacrifices in Judaism were no longer possible. It's not that they decided one day we won't do this. They had no choice. The whole facility of the temple operated a bit like an abattoir, and now it was destroyed. They could not have these sacrifices. So how now do we pay back God for the mistakes we've made became a question. And it's taken a long time. A new way had to be found to celebrate reconciliation and thanksgiving without the shedding of the blood of innocent animals and the obsession with sacrifices as a way of appeasing God. So some of those sacrifices were very demanding, especially for the poor. How do we find the money to buy 2 turtle doves? Let alone as we would look in our era and say, fancy killing innocent animals to please God. Is that how God would want his creation to be experienced? The connection between sin and suffering, as many gospel encounters highlight, led those who suffered to believe that they were being punished cruelly by God for their sins or the sins of their ancestors. And we've seen that in our own Christian era. People thinking that God is punishing me for something I did maybe a long time ago. What sort of God is that we've come to believe in if we are treating God like that? So this applied to the blind, the deaf, the lame, the lepers, and many who suffered what we would today call mental illness. They were connected because of their illness. They must be sinners. And Jesus continually invited those people into fellowship, into belonging. And a feature of his ministry was to gather people or to join them. A little phrase, for example, the tax collectors and sinners were sitting at the table with Jesus. So here's public sinners feeling that they were able to approach Jesus at a table and eat with him, when that eating together was such a sacred thing in the culture. So they felt that they would be accepted by him if they sat down with him. Through these meals, they could experience Jesus' message that God loves every person, that no one's excluded from that love, and that we should act this way towards one another. Refugees and migrants are welcome despite the emphasis we're seeing in the world at the moment. Now, this is something that we know very well, but it was radical in the time. The outsiders were insiders. That Jesus especially looked out for these people to tell them that God loved them and that they belonged. And whatever their expressions of sinfulness might have been interpreted as by being ill, didn't matter, didn't count, didn't apply. So there were no blood sacrifices that Jesus spoke about required to win God's favour. So often, as we know, a physical healing was proof that the guilt of the sin had been dispelled. That's finished. Jesus consistently told people, your faith has made you well. He didn't ask them to recite the Nicene Creed, that kind of faith. But the faith that I can do this for you, that God can heal you, is all you need. No hurdles to jump over. In the light of this, we should be attentive to healing in our ministry by word or action. The sacrament of the sick, for example, provides a wonderful opportunity to ritualise and celebrate the power of forgiveness. It can release long-suffering burdens. It can help people feel healed of emotional and spiritual pain. It can also be a great comfort to the aged and the infirm. A compassionate ear, likewise, can allow a person to talk through their sorrows, and by experiencing true companionship, a genuine, empathetic, compassionate listener, people can be healed of alienation and isolation. And any of us are capable of offering that. Many Christians still today think that tragic accidents or serious illnesses are sent by God to punish people for their sins. So, of course, where we encounter that thinking, we have to challenge it. And we have to challenge it not just as an empty promise, but draw on examples of Jesus. He refused to acknowledge that, for example, when he was asked if that was the reason why some people were killed when a tower at Siloam fell on them. Is that because they were sinners? He refused to accept that. He also denied that the man born blind was blind because his parents were sinners. He didn't condemn the woman accused of adultery according to the law of the time. He saw past these narrow, confining, restrictive images of God. The bishops of the European Union, we have in our region PASPAC, so their acronym is commies, released a reflection paper in May this year on mental health in Europe, a call for care. And it warned that rising loneliness and isolation are driving a profound mental crisis. We hear this in Australia, don't we? We hear it in Vietnam, in Papua New Guinea, New Zealand. It's very big around the world. That document urges policymakers to strengthen community networks, to curb the isolating effects of excessive digitalisation, and to adopt a holistic spiritual approach to mental health care. As I'll point out a couple of times, that first area, strengthening community networks, is something we should be in the forefront of. It's absolutely central to our charism to create community. And the Passion Expanding Groups are one example of that, but our parishes, whatever ministries, our school ministry, to create a sense of community so that people are not living in isolation, in separation from each other. So that paper of the bishops claims that loneliness constitutes a profound source of psychological, emotional, and in many cases, spiritual suffering. We need to be attentive to this crisis of loneliness, to the lack of belonging, especially given the emphasis on community that's central to our charism. So in the last couple of years, for example, in the Passion Expanding Groups, we're trying to emphasise how important it is to belong. That for a long time, the emphasis was if you believe and you behave, then we'll let you belong. We'll baptise you then. Jesus didn't work that way, and nor did St. Paul. Belonging, you start belonging, and out of that belonging, people then can behave and can come to believe. So whatever we do, we've got to be, in this new era, very devoted to creating a sense of belonging for people in our ministries. Mental illness and artificial intelligence are constantly discussed in the media today, as of course are news of war. And Chi in particular, I'm sure others who are presenting will take up some of these issues, especially of AI. And our younger Passionist men are paying increased attention to the issue of trauma. From my role, it's very obvious that many of our men who've joined the Passionists in Vietnam have suffered trauma. So if they have, how many other people in the culture have suffered trauma? If you've been through a war such as the American War, as they call it, how many millions of people has that affected, including generations? If there's 1 million soldiers alone that have been killed, Russian soldiers killed, and 500,000, 300,000, 400,000 Ukrainians, how many of their families are affected? In Palestine, how are those young men especially going to grow up when they become young adults, when they see and remember what happened to them? So the seeds of trauma are growing, just incredible in our culture. So could these issues show us where the message of the cross today needs our attention and our interpretation? That we can speak to this, address people and walk with people. Several people who encountered Jesus displayed behaviours that today we might commonly refer to as mental illness or neurological conditions. The experiences are sometimes referred to as demonic possession, and they suggest spiritual affliction or severe suffering, rather than they're not described as medical disorders, linked obviously with sin. The biblical culture didn't separate mental, physical and spiritual suffering the way modern Western medicine does. It saw them as affecting each other. So demonic possession could describe a wide range of conditions that today we might refer to as psychiatric or psychotic illness, epilepsy, social alienation, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, extreme distress or behaviour considered dangerous or abnormal. An example would be the Charism demoniac, who we're told lived amongst the tombs. That's where his home was. He used to harm himself, shouting uncontrollably, isolating himself socially, and was described as having extraordinary agitation. Apart from that, he was very calm. So that description could suggest severe psychosis, schizophrenia, spectrum disorder, trauma, or mania. And he, just like that, encountered Jesus. The boy who was having seizures fell down, foamed at the mouth, became rigid and had convulsions. Scholars and physicians have noted similarities to epilepsy. Some mute or blind and mute persons healed by Jesus had been unable to speak, unable to hear, or to communicate normally. So these might be described today as having neurological conditions, trauma responses, developmental disorders, or psychosomatic illnesses. The man by the pool at Bethesda, who with others had long-term disabling conditions, they might today be understood as having physical illnesses with an overlap of chronic illness, despair, and psychological suffering. You have what might be regarded as a funny or strange question that Jesus asks this man. He's been there for 38 years. And Jesus says, "What do you want to do for me?" You can imagine, what do I want to do? Isn't it obvious? after 38 years. But that's a key thing. He's involving the man in the healing process. What do you want? Can you name what you want? And as we know to others, get up, pick up your mat and walk home, involving the person in this healing process. It's not just all done for them. He returned people to their community. Go home to your own people, this man who wanted to follow him, and tell them how much the Lord's done for you. This is the man from Charism who's crazy, living amongst the tombs, smashing himself, but he wants to go and follow Jesus now that he's healed. But Jesus says, no, stay with your own people. The Gospels tell us that 7 demons were cast out of Mary Magdalene, but they don't provide any information on the symptoms or the details of this possession. Later traditions sometimes portrayed her emotionally or psychologically troubled, although the biblical text itself doesn't diagnose anything. And from what we have, fortunately, with the help of Pope Francis and others, come to see, there's probably no one in history more maligned than Mary Magdalene. Such a faithful disciple, and she's drawn as a prostitute. But there's no story at all in the Gospels that indicates that was the case. The inspirational thing with regard to Mary Magdalene is that having had these demons cast out of her, so looking at what we were just suggesting, whatever was possessing her, some neurological, psychological circumstance, whatever that was, Jesus invited her. Interestingly, the Gerasene demoniac invited himself. He wanted to say thank you by becoming a disciple. But Jesus invited her to be a close disciple who, often travelled with her, along with other women, supported him financially out of her own possessions. And Pope Francis has referred to her as the Apostle of the Apostles. At G's ordination recently, we had the Litany of the Saints, and we had all the apostles, and then we had Mary Magdalene. She goes first, because she was the first person to announce the resurrection. So what an incredible model. Healed from some kind of demonic possession to becoming the first person to announce that Jesus has risen, and a faithful disciple in between. If the gospel writers in their culture could have written Mary Magdalene out of the story and made her less important, they would have. But obviously they couldn't. She was extremely significant. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, written a fantastic book, The Body Keeps the Score. He connects well with Jesus' healing ministry. He argues that healing from trauma requires physical, sensory-based practices to regulate the nervous system. And the Gospels frequently depict Jesus using tactile actions such as touching the sick, applying mud, taking individuals by the hand to assist in spiritual and emotional healing. So we definitely include Mary Magdalene into this. She's helped not only from her possession, whatever that was, but she's called now into a discipleship role. He respected the dignity of those who suffered by inviting them to be agents actively in their own healing. The Paul of the Cross wanted an image of Mary Magdalene displayed in every Passionist community, and he proclaimed her the patron of lay Passionists. So perhaps, again, when we look at what do we need to do in this coming era, perhaps Mary Magdalene can show us who and how to reach out to the people of our times. How many people who might be, to us, possessed have the potential to be a Mary Magdalene? But we might scoff and say, oh, she or he's a bit disoriented. And instead of those images of Mary Magdalene as a prostitute, perhaps something far more dignified can be a representation of her. A Canadian philosopher in the 1960s, Marshall McLuhan, is best known for his insights into communication and the impact of media on society. So at the time that he was writing, mass media was a new expression. Of course, mass media is quite different today. It's much more about social media, artificial intelligence and such things. But what he had to say applies equally. His famous slogan was, "The medium is the message." So in other words, you can have the most wonderful message, but it's how you communicate it that's going to make it effective or not. And that's why so many people fall asleep when someone's talking.
Sorry, Brian.
So Marshall McLuhan recommended that the primary focus of study should be on the medium of communication rather than the message. So you can have all the right content and character, but do you know how to get this message across? Are you going to speak in a monotone voice for 30 minutes and not even notice that it's not even relevant because of the way it's not communicated? An example of this would be logos or symbols. You may not know all what those symbols represent, but you know many of them, don't you? As soon as you see them, you know, gee, Google, I know what that is. You don't have to say any words. So without giving a talk about a particular company or whatever, maybe one word or one symbol can communicate what you're trying to say, bring people's awareness. And our own province logo, four cultures essentially represented by 4 different flowers united with the Passionist sign. From St Paul's across this time until the last century, the best Passionist preachers were appointed to be missioners. So they didn't get appointed to parishes so much. Our perhaps most famous provincial, Father Charles Corbett, said, "I was never a missioner. They made me administration, formator, provincial, and then later hospital chaplain. And we were never the same status as the missioners because they could go out, preach these wonderful sermons." The content of their homilies was given particular focus in their training. They didn't just get up and talk, they were trained about the theatre that associates. We just had a couple of days ago, JD, you read out about Francis Clune, didn't you? Francis Clune was he's 91, he did his last mission. But from the time he was about 70 onwards, he looked very, very old. So he would arrive in a parish, no one knew who he was, just knew Father Francis. He had quite a reputation. He'd won a bravery medal during the war, First World War. But to climb, the Passionists used to build a platform out from the sanctuary right across the front seats. So they were right up in front of the people. The people in the first row were looking up at the missioner right above them. So he would walk up the stairs as if he could hardly get up there. Very frail. There's nothing wrong with him. Okay. So all the people are watching this old guy, feeling sorry for him. And then he would, as they all did, take off his mantle and theatrically fold it in a movement that they practiced, so it would just fold perfectly 3 swoops down at his feet. So they had the big mission crucifix next to them, as well as that. So once he started preaching, he had quite an unusual voice. They were captivated. This is a guy who was very different to what they saw as this old bloke walking up the stairs. But that was part of the training, to use those things. and they were taught about voice projection. They didn't have microphones often, so there was priests who could speak at Marrickville, which is a huge church, without a microphone and be heard at the back. So they were trained, as some of you would remember Mark Nugent, incredible voice projection. And you think about Winston Churchill's inspiring war speeches on the radio, people would gather around the radio and listen to Churchill. They have very little impact today because our culture is not audio, it's visual. I need to see him and see what he's saying. So many people today have got very short attention spans, Jim, haven't they?
Yes,
And especially this applies to verbal dialogue because we're so used to images. The era that Marshall McLuhan was talking about in the 50s and 60s, by about the end of that era, the early 70s, the movies on television that were shown, they realised we have to have a commercial about every 10 minutes because people can't watch the whole movie. And some people can't today go to a theatre and watch a full movie. And that's why, even way back in Shakespeare's day, in plays, they had little breaks of comedy. You would all remember Jesus Christ Superstar. And you had the scene of Herod, walking across the swimming pool, a bit of comedy, so that people could have a bit of a break from the intense drama of that story. So that's all built in. And missioners, the way we did missions, telling a joke was part of the story. If you couldn't tell a joke, or you didn't have a joke, you'd say, why is this guy a missioner? Because that's part of keeping the people awake. So if the medium is the message, if what you're communicating is not as important as how you communicate it, then obviously some homilies or talks or lectures are wasted because the people have gone out to lunch. Some of you have done a leadership course. We did one little exercise. We could do it and show you. If I read something, anything out of the Bible or anything, ask you, whilst I'm doing this little speech, might only be 1 minute, any time that you feel a trigger that distracts you, just call out trigger. It's incredible. Some people 10 times in a minute. Because that's what we're like. I might start off talking about trauma and you start thinking, I know someone who just told me yesterday how traumatised they are. So you're not interested in what I've got to say for a moment. I've got to take that in. So communication, especially including forms of prayer, have entered a new era, away from rattling off many words or passively listening, to visual images using videos, Zoom, webinars, and other forms of social media, and of course the whole world of artificial intelligence, which we can explore a little. But rattling off words, for some people, it's just meaningless now. Or just being totally passive. Why is the priest saying all the words and I'm just sitting here saying nothing? Many people today have got short attention spans. I've already said that, so I've got a short attention span. And for many people, English is not their first language, and that's true of the men in our own province. Some of them, Eric, fourth language English, isn't it? And Joseph, third language. So many people, they've got to do a few mental somersaults to take in the message because English is not some of the phrases they've never heard before. If we don't take that into account, you come back to the medium as the message. Saying beautiful words, but they're going right over people's heads. So we have to be creative in sharing the message of the Passion as an experience that touches the hearts of the listeners. Paul Lacrosse's message to missioners was, let your message fall like gentle rain on hardened hearts. It's a beautiful expression. Not interested in the head, But let this touch people's hearts so that they can recognise that God does profoundly love them. And to achieve this, we have to adopt some new communication methods and new content. There are many websites that provide ways of praying, for example, that include music, silence, images and a few words. And many of them offer daily reflections. I'm sure Chi will mention, and our own Vietnamese men are offering very brief 1-minute reflections. The province has a daily reflection on the gospel or the readings of the day. So these sorts of prayers are less formal. So one of them, Pray As You Go, for example, every day you can just log on and follow that prayer, which is a mixture of psalm, reading, music, sacred space, which the Irish have had for quite a long time. And there are Passionist sites, not just on our own webpage, but Passionists from other provinces. St. Vincent de Paul said, "It's pointless preaching to a hungry person until you've fed them." I think the same could be said about preaching or teaching about believing, unless a person feels a sense of belonging, promising something that they've never experienced, never likely to experience, or don't believe it's going to happen. So people need to feel that they belong. That's critical. So how can we do that? First of all, in what and how we say, but also what we create out of our ministry, that sense of belonging. And because of our commitment to community, as I've said, Passionists should see belonging as an integral part of our ministry. We're trying to help people to belong. The sense of isolation that people feel is just quite amazing. Where's Jeff? Jeff, just what you were sharing tonight, what it was like for you after Mary Ellen died, just that sense of, and even Joan now, how feeling lonely because of this emptiness that's enveloped me. There are so many people in that position. So how can we reach those people with practical support and belonging? Last section, Passionists as instruments of compassion. St. Francis prayed, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace." I think we should be seeking to be instruments of hope who bring the compassionate and forgiving love of Jesus to those people that we meet or minister with. We should also be seeking to bring people together in and for community, in whatever ministry we're engaged in. We should also be assisting people to contemplate so that they can bring the fruit of their prayer and their reflection into the lives of their communities, their families, and their everyday activities and ministries. This is again, nemo dat quod non habet. How can you do that? How can you help people to be contemplative and create something for their communities if you can't do it yourself, if you haven't done it yourself? So we've got to start with ourselves. So as we know, there's many diverse musical instruments. As a matter of interest, does anyone know what the recent survey, Chris knows, but the recent survey, the ABCD, what's the most popular musical instrument in Australia? You can speak up. It's okay to be wrong. Or pardon?
Keyboard.
A cello. So lots of different instruments, and using the analogy of ourselves as instruments, there's many different gifts we have, both individually as a province. Many different ways, therefore, of exercising authentic Passionist ministry. Our diverse ways of living and sharing our charism are more needed than ever because the world we live in and the church we serve is diverse and is multicultural. So in seeking new ways to express our charism, we must consider, I think, among other challenges, how we can bring our charism to those who suffer mental illness, loneliness, including all those people, so many, aged and living alone, as well as those suffering trauma. Mental illness and trauma affects millions of people in each of the countries that makes up our province. Reports indicate that 61% of Vietnamese children experience trauma. So that's 62 million people. That's a lot of people, a lot of children. 56% of Papua New Guinean children. That's a lot of children. 55% of New Zealand children. And 42% of Australian children. So it's quite staggering, isn't it? And these children are going to grow up to be adolescents, looking for meaning, belief in themselves, belonging, how they're going to be helped. And the adults who suffer from mental illness, 15% of Vietnamese, which is 15 million, 12% of Papua New Guineans, 22% of New Zealanders, and 15% of Australians. So a lot of adults too. So it's not surprising we read in the paper every day, don't we, issues of mental illness, domestic violence, etc. So what music are we going to play for so many people? What instruments will we use? Is it possible that the music we're playing or the instruments we're using are never heard by most of these people? Is our music out of date, irrelevant, or unattractive for those people needing or seeking life? So let's just summarise what we've looked at. Our core passionist message is faithfulness to God's will, to leave everything in God's hands. In rethinking the meaning of suffering, death and redemption, sacrificial language is outdated and death is transformational, so it's not something that ends. As our Eucharistic prayer says, life is changed, not ended. What we learn from Jesus about human suffering, he rejected suffering as a sign of sin, and he called on those who suffered to join in fellowship, to create belonging. He created belonging, which included tax collectors, lepers, anybody. With regard to mental illness, trauma, etc., attend to isolation, loneliness and trauma. Help people to belong to community. Mary Magdalene, healed from mental illness, became a prime disciple, or the prime disciple. How many Mary Magdalenes might there be waiting for healing? Remembering that she's the patron of lay companions. Marshall McLuhan's message in this area, how we must pay attention to how we communicate, not just what we communicate. That includes all these new options, IT, AI, images, more than words. The 1 minute example of some of the Vietnamese men who Chi can talk about tomorrow. And to move from head to heart. And passionists as instruments of compassion to bring our charism to those who suffer mental illness, loneliness or trauma. And to recognise the high percentage of children who suffer trauma that we just looked at is staggering. To contemplate and lead others to the same experience. Help people to bring the fruit of their prayer and reflection into the lives of those people they live with, their own communities, their own families. In this way, their activity is built on their spirituality, what they do. But remembering, Namo Dat Quad none have it if you haven't got it yourself, how are you going to help create it for others? So what music will we play for so many people? What instruments will we use? Is it possible that we're playing or the instruments we're using are never heard by most of the people? Is our music out of date, irrelevant or unattractive for those needing or seeking life? So finally, the passion is the most overwhelming work of God's love. How do we best live and proclaim this in a change of era? And perhaps we less focus on what we do and more focus on how we do it. Thank you. Speaking about how you do it, one of the things that when I was involved in catechetics is that wherever possible you give people notes of what you've just done, because we only remember 10% of what we hear, 20% of what we see and hear, so that's 80%, either only half got or forgot. So I'll give you in a minute a little handout. What about we spend about 15, 20 minutes just with a little group of 4, 5 people, and just what comes to your mind in the light of all that? You better get these people to turn around in front of you.
Printer.
Mm-hmm.
You also printed the handout.
Yeah, this is the handout, yeah.
That's a good idea.
Come out all right?
We take a few minutes to adjust that. But at the end, people are able to see and read it like this. Even it wasn't really good angle, because when you try to fix it when it's already happened, it's very hard. But at least people can able to hear and read like that.
Yeah. Can we change that tomorrow? Can we change that tomorrow?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to add another laptop and copy from the PowerPoint.
I'll give you a handout. I just got to go. Thank you. 22 past 8.